What's your tenure with the company, Melody? David Langston settled into his executive chair, his tone unsettlingly nonchalant. 29 years, quite an achievement. 29 years and 362 days, precisely, I answered, my gut churning as I spotted the manila envelope positioned on his desk. Throughout my entire career at GRW Manufacturing, I'd never received a summons to an executive's office on a Friday evening. This spelled trouble. I am Melody Reynolds, 61 years of age, and until moments ago, I served as the head compliance officer at a major manufacturing firm in St. Paul. I dedicated nearly 3 decades to ensuring Grant well-maintained adherence to legal standards, recording violations, and holding my ground when colleagues sought shortcuts to complicated issues. My retirement benefits were scheduled to become fully available on Monday, merely 3 days hence. The goal I'd pursued throughout my professional life was finally within grasp. David pushed the envelope across his gleaming desk surface. Budget reductions require us to terminate your employment, he stated, avoiding eye contact. This takes effect right now. The office appeared to spin momentarily. Budget reductions. Grantwell had recently reported unprecedented quarterly earnings. Here's your exit package, he went on, drumming his perfectly groomed fingers on the envelope. Execute this by tomorrow or receive nothing. Human Resources will accompany you to gather your belongings. I should have experienced fury, disbelief, or the impulse to beg. Instead, an unexpected serenity enveloped me. This wasn't coincidental. This was deliberately orchestrated to occur precisely before my retirement benefits became permanent. I appreciate the experience, I responded softly, collecting the envelope. I chose not to examine its contents. David appeared taken aback by my calm demeanor, likely anticipating emotional outbursts or objections. However, I built my career analyzing trends, and this pattern was unmistakable. I rose, adjusted my dress, and departed with my self-respect preserved. Janet from Human Resources lingered uncomfortably while I gathered my belongings. Thomas's photograph, the plant my daughter gifted me upon leaving for university 15 years prior, and my 25-year service award. I took little. Most valuable things couldn't be contained in a storage box. I'm deeply sorry, Melody, Janet murmured, nervously glancing at the security officer assigned to escort me. This is unjust, such is life, I responded, though internally I understood otherwise. This wasn't merely unjust, it was likely unlawful. For 4 years, I'd been carefully recording financial discrepancies that had intensified since David's company arrival. I'd submitted comprehensive reports through official channels, highlighted suspicious activities, and even provided evidence of altered documentation. Everything had been dismissed, concealed, or returned with directions to concentrate on more urgent issues. During my final walk through the entrance area, the security guard awkwardly opened the door. Enjoy your weekend, Mrs. Reynolds, he said, clearly uncomfortable with his participation in this performance. I acknowledged politely. I believe I shall. The journey home felt dreamlike. 29 years of commitment concluded with a manila envelope and a cardboard container. April's rainfall drummed on my windshield as I traveled St. Paul's familiar streets, passing the cathedral where Thomas and I exchanged vows, beyond the school where our daughter received her diploma, toward the humble residence I'd maintained. Alone since losing my husband 12 years earlier, I reflected on the compromises I'd made for GRW. The school performances missed during those initial years when I stayed late pursuing promotions, family trips shortened by compliance emergencies, countless evenings spent examining documentation that others lacked patience to review. I devoted my best years to the organization, trusting in the security my retirement would eventually deliver. Upon reaching my driveway, I remained still momentarily, permitting myself to experience the impact of recent events. David Langston had been employed for merely 6 months. He'd arrived with credentials for operational efficiency, typically meaning expense reduction at any cost. I'd anticipated we would eventually conflict when I declined to approve compliance on his recent cost reduction proposal, a strategy that circumvented multiple regulatory standards. What I hadn't expected was how swiftly and mercilessly he would act to remove me. Inside, I prepared tea and seated myself at my kitchen table, finally examining the severance offer. The conditions were offensive. 3 months' wages in return for abandoning all future legal claims against the organization. No retirement benefits, no medical coverage extension, no recognition of nearly 30 years of dedication. Simply a payment and a legal snare intended to silence me. The paperwork demanded my signature by 5 o'clock tomorrow afternoon. They relied on panic and despair to force quick signing without consultation. This wasn't standard procedure. It was a focused attempt to steal what I'd earned. I placed the documents aside and moved to my home office, where I maintained personal files. Behind family photograph collections sat a fireproof security container, my safeguard. For 4 years, I'd been taking home copies of concerning financial records, maintaining detailed conversation notes, and preserving emails that revealed misconduct patterns, not because I intended to utilize them, but because my professional instincts suggested something was amiss. I opened the container and examined its contents. Loan documentation containing false information, quarterly statements with altered numbers, emails directing staff to predate quality assurance certifications. Everything was present. Over 1,000 pages of proof demonstrating systematic deception that had escalated under David's leadership. I'd reported each issue through appropriate channels, only to be disregarded or marginalized. I reached for my telephone, scrolling to a contact unused for years. Gregory Sanchez had previously served as Grant Wells' chief financial officer before transitioning to the Securities and Exchange Commission. He'd always valued my thoroughness, even when others found it tiresome. It's time, I thought, my finger hovering over his name. The following morning, I awakened with determination. After nearly 2 hours of conversation with Gregory the previous evening, I had a definite strategy. I dressed meticulously in the dark suit I saved for significant meetings, as though preparing for combat. In some ways, I was. Gregory had listened carefully as I detailed the circumstances and described the evidence I'd gathered. His reaction was cautious but firm. This extends beyond wrongful dismissal, Melody. Based on your description, Grant Well could face severe securities violations. The timing regarding your retirement, that's merely the beginning. He'd outlined the whistleblower safeguards available through the SEC and scheduled me to meet his team Monday morning. Don't execute anything, he'd warned, and protect those documents. I spent Saturday morning duplicating everything, arranging the evidence chronologically, and creating a comprehensive index. The activity kept me concentrated, preventing anger and pain from overwhelming me. By midday, I had 3 matching packages prepared, 1 for the SEC, 1 for my personal files, and 1 for leverage if necessary. My telephone rang repeatedly throughout the day. Janet from HR, David Langston, even the corporation's chief legal officer. I allowed each call to reach voicemail, listening to their increasingly frantic messages. Melody, we require that documentation executed today. David's voice was strained. I can collect it personally if helpful. The legal counsel was more direct. Miss Reynolds, it's crucial we receive your signed contract before business closure. Non-compliance could eliminate your severance entirely. Their desperation validated my suspicions. They understood their vulnerability and wanted my silence secured before the weekend concluded. At 4:30 p.m., my doorbell chimed through the peephole. I observed David on my porch, his costly suit appearing misplaced in my modest area. I didn't respond. Melody, I know you're present, he called through the door. This is absurd. Simply execute the documents and we can proceed. I watched silently as he eventually left an envelope in my mailbox and returned to his luxury car. Only then did I collect it. Another copy of the identical contract with a handwritten message. Final chance signed by 9 a.m. Monday. That evening, my daughter called for our regular conversation. Elizabeth detected something unusual in my voice. Mom, what's wrong? You sound different. I considered minimizing the situation, but decided against it. Elizabeth deserved honesty. I was dismissed yesterday. I stated simply, what? But your days from your complete retirement benefits. They can't do that. They did, I replied, but don't worry, I'm managing it. Do you need me home? I can catch a flight from Denver tomorrow. No, dear, remain there. I have this handled. After we disconnected, I sat in my living room as evening approached, contemplating Monday's SEC meeting. For years, I'd attempted to resolve these matters internally, believing in the system and the company's honesty. I'd been faithful, discreet, and professional even when suspecting serious misconduct. But Grantwell had made its decision, and now I would make mine. I wouldn't execute their contract, wouldn't be silenced, and most importantly, wouldn't allow them to discard 30 years of my life without consequences. Monday couldn't arrive quickly enough. Monday morning came with a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. I dressed carefully, secured my evidence in a professional briefcase, and traveled downtown to the federal complex where Gregory had arranged our appointment. The significance of my upcoming actions weighed heavily, but there was also a sense of correctness to everything. The SEC offices were modest yet impressive, all glass dividers and quiet discussions. Gregory met me in the reception area, his recognizable face showing more age, but retaining the keen intelligence I remembered. Melody, he said warmly, grasping my hand. I wish circumstances were better for our reunion. It's wonderful seeing you, Gregory, I responded. Thank you for treating this seriously. He escorted me to a meeting room where two additional investigators waited: Angela Brennan, a senior enforcement lawyer, and James Weston, a forensic auditor. Both greeted me professionally. Mrs. Reynolds, Angela began, before we proceed, I want to verify you understand today's process. Once you provide this information, an investigation becomes official. There's no reversal. I nodded. I completely understand. For 3 hours, I guided them through my documentation, the irregular financial reporting I'd initially detected 4 years ago when shipment records didn't match invoices, the quality assurance certifications backdated after product delivery, the revenue manipulation pattern that had intensified recently, particularly following David Langston's arrival. James reviewed the financial records with increasing alarm. These discrepancies aren't minor, he observed. The company has been systematically inflating revenues by at least 18% for 2 years. That constitutes securities fraud. You reported these issues internally, Angela inquired, multiple times. I confirmed, displaying copies of my reports and emails. Each time I was told issues were being resolved or that I was misinterpreting information. When David joined 6 months ago, my concerns were redirected to his office, where they vanished. Gregory leaned forward. You believe your dismissal directly related to these reports? Absolutely. The timing 3 days before my retirement vested makes it clear. More than that, I'd recently identified several major problems with David's latest cost reduction initiative. He needed me eliminated before I could escalate further. As our meeting concluded, Angela outlined subsequent steps. We'll need your formal statement, then begin our investigation, which typically remains confidential until we determine enforcement action necessity. How long will that require? I asked. It varies, she replied, but given your documentation and the clear misconduct pattern, we may proceed rapidly. I hadn't returned home when my telephone rang. Janet from HR, her voice shaking. Melody, something's occurring. The board just scheduled an emergency session David's been confined to his office all morning, and there are rumors about SEC investigators contacting our legal counsel. So it had begun faster than anticipated. The SEC must have immediately contacted Grantwell's legal team. I'm not surprised, I said calmly. Janet hesitated. Melody, did you report something? I simply did what should have been done years ago. I replied, what's happening with my retirement documentation? That's why I'm calling. The executive committee is examining your dismissal. They've suspended everything pending further notice. An hour later, my telephone rang again, this time William Hargrove, the board chairman. a man who had barely acknowledged my presence during our few previous encounters. "Miss Reynolds," he said, his typically confident voice sounding strained. "We appear to have a situation requiring your input. Would you consider coming to the office tomorrow morning for discussion?" "That won't be possible, Mr. Hargrove," I replied. "Any discussions should include my legal representative and potentially Securities and Exchange Commission representatives. I'm sure you understand." The silence was profound. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I see. Perhaps we can arrange something more formal." As I disconnected, I felt no satisfaction, only deep fatigue at its necessity. I'd never wanted to be a whistleblower. I'd only wanted to perform my job with integrity and retire with earned security. But GRW well had forced my hand, and now we'd all face consequences. My telephone continued ringing throughout the evening, colleagues seeking information, executives attempting damage control. I answered none. The time for private discussions had ended. Now everything would occur publicly. By Wednesday morning, the storm had fully erupted. Local business publications featured headlines about NSEC investigation into Grantwell Manufacturing, sending the company's stock plummeting. Financial analysts who had praised David's efficiency measures weeks earlier now questioned the entire company's reporting integrity. I received an official letter from Grantwell's legal department rescinding my dismissal notice and placing me on administrative leave with complete benefits pending internal review. It was a transparent damage control attempt, arriving far too late. At 10 a.m., my attorney Barbara Reynolds, no relation, though the coincidence amused us both, accompanied me to Grantwell's headquarters. The same security guard who had escorted me out Friday now nodded respectfully as we entered. The building's atmosphere was tense, with employees gathered in whispered conversations that ceased when we passed. We were shown to the main boardroom where William Hargrove waited with outside counsel and 3 additional board members. David Langston was notably absent. "Thank you for coming, Miss Reynolds," William began, appearing to have aged years in days. "We've initiated comprehensive internal investigation into your raised concerns," Barbara spoke before I could respond. "Let's clarify something, Mr. Hargrove. Ms. Reynolds didn't suddenly raise these concerns after her dismissal. She documented and reported them repeatedly over 4 years as her position required. The company's decision to ignore those reports, then terminate her days before retirement vesting, speaks volumes." William shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, well, that's part of our investigation. I want to personally assure Ms. Reynolds that her dismissal has been reversed. We consider her an employee in good standing with all benefits preserved, including my retirement benefits." I asked directly. "Certainly," he replied quickly. "In fact, we're prepared to offer a consulting position after your retirement, beginning immediately if desired. We value your expertise." "My client isn't making decisions today," Barbara interrupted, "and any discussion about future arrangements should be preceded by full accounting of how her previous concerns were suppressed." The meeting continued another hour with board members attempting to distance themselves from both David's actions and the financial irregularities I documented. They portrayed themselves as misinformation victims, expressing shock and disappointment at apparent misconduct. I remained mostly silent, allowing Barbara to handle legal maneuvering while observing their body language. These were people I'd worked alongside for years, yet they'd never truly noticed me. Now they couldn't look away, their expressions mixing fear and newfound respect. As we prepared to leave, William made one final appeal. "Melody, we're hoping you might consider speaking with SEC investigators about corrective actions we're implementing. Your support would be invaluable." I looked at him directly for the first time. "Mr. Hargrove, I've spent 29 years dedicated to this company's compliance. During that time, I filed 47 major reports documenting serious irregularities. I sent 16 memos specifically addressing issues now under investigation. I requested 9 meetings with executive leadership to discuss these concerns, of which only 2 were granted, neither resulting in action. At what point in that history did I have your support? The room fell silent. I'll cooperate fully with both internal investigation and the SEC. I continued, but I'll speak only to facts as I always have, whether those facts support or damage. Grantwell will depend entirely on your future actions, not your words in this room. As Barbara and I departed, she whispered, "That was perfectly stated. It wasn't until we reached the parking lot that I allowed myself a deep breath." The adrenaline that had sustained me through the confrontation began fading, leaving me exhausted but clear-headed. This wasn't victory, not yet. It was merely accountability's beginning. What happens now? I asked Barbara as we stood beside our vehicles. Now, she smiled slightly. They scramble to save what they can while investigation continues. But make no mistake, Melody, they're terrified of you. I shook my head. They're not terrified of me. They're terrified of the truth. There's a difference. Barbara nodded thoughtfully. There is indeed. And that difference is why you'll win this, regardless of outcome. As I drove home, I wondered what Thomas would have thought of all this. My late husband had always encouraged my meticulous nature, even when others found it frustrating. Your attention to detail isn't a quirk, Melody. He'd say it's a superpower. Perhaps he'd been right all along. By Friday, exactly 1 week after my dismissal, the story had evolved into a full corporate scandal. The SEC had issued formal information requests to Grantwell, and an internal memo from William Hargrove announced David Langston's immediate suspension pending investigation. The company's stock had dropped nearly 30%, triggering concerns from major investors and partners. I was no longer just Melody Reynolds, overlooked compliance officer. Business journals now referred to me as a whistleblower and the woman who exposed Grantwell. The sudden attention was uncomfortable, but I remained focused on the process, working closely with SEC investigators who now maintained offices in a separate building near Grant's headquarters. The evidence I'd provided had opened many doors, but the investigation was revealing even more troubling patterns. Gregory called with progress updates. "Melody, it's worse than we thought," he said gravely. "The financial manipulation extends back at least 5 years, predating Langston. He accelerated it but didn't initiate it. I suspected as much," I replied. "There were irregularities I couldn't fully document because I couldn't access certain executive-level reports. Well, we can access them now," Gregory continued. "They tell a story of systematic fraud designed to inflate company value. The board claims ignorance, but at least 3 members had to have known they approved key transactions. This news should have vindicated me, but instead left me feeling hollow. The company I dedicated my life to had been corrupted at levels even I hadn't fully comprehended. The people I'd trusted with my concerns had been actively participating in the very fraud I was reporting. That afternoon, I received a call from Elizabeth, her voice tight with anger. "Mom, have you seen the news? They're trying to discredit you." I'd been avoiding media coverage, focusing instead on official proceedings. "What are they saying?" I asked calmly. That GRW executive Langston gave an interview claiming you had performance issues and were bitter about being passed over for promotion. He's making it sound like you're retaliating because of personal grievances. I wasn't surprised. It was a predictable defense strategy: attack the whistleblower's credibility rather than address allegations. "It doesn't matter, Elizabeth," I assured her. "The evidence speaks for itself. My performance reviews have been exemplary for 29 years. They can't rewrite that history." But David was trying to do exactly that. By evening, several news outlets had picked up his narrative, questioning my motives and suggesting I'd manipulated documentation to frame him. It was a desperate move from a desperate man, but it still stung to see my integrity questioned so publicly. Barbara called immediately. "Don't respond to any of it," she advised. "The SEC will issue a statement tomorrow clarifying your whistleblower status and evidence credibility. Let official channels handle this." I wasn't planning to respond. I told her, but I am going to do something else. The next morning, I drove to my local bank and requested to speak with the manager. Tracy Ferguson. I'd known her for years as she handled most of Grantwell's local banking transactions. Melody, she greeted me warmly. I've been following the news. How are you holding up? I'm fine, Tracy, but I need access to my safe deposit box. Inside the private room, I opened the box and removed a sealed envelope I'd placed there 3 years ago. It contained copies of email exchanges between David's predecessor and to board members discussing ways to manage financial appearances during a critical acquisition period. I had found these accidentally while archiving old emails, and something had told me to secure them separately from my other documentation. I hadn't included these in my initial SEC report because they weren't directly related to current issues, but now, with David attempting to undermine my credibility, they provided crucial context showing that problematic practices predated my concerns about him specifically. I called Gregory immediately. I have something you need to see, I told him. It changes the narrative completely. As I drove to meet him, I felt no satisfaction, only certainty that the full truth would now emerge regardless of who was implicated. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Monday morning, 10 days after my dismissal and 7 days after the SEC investigation became public. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be there to know what was happening. The additional documentation I'd provided had dramatically accelerated the investigation, implicating not just David, but multiple board members in a years-long pattern of financial manipulation. Gregory called me from outside the meeting room. It's chaos in there, he reported. The SEC enforcement team just presented their preliminary findings. 3 board members have resigned immediately. David is trying to claim he was following established practices, but no one's buying it anymore. By noon, Grantwell issued a press release announcing leadership restructuring and full regulatory cooperation. The carefully worded statement confirmed for board members' resignations, including William Hargrove and David Langston's termination for cause. The company's stock, already battered, dropped another 12%. That afternoon, my telephone rang. Janet from HR again. The interim CEO wants to meet with you tomorrow if possible. The interim CEO was Patricia Donovan, the former chief operating officer who had always treated me with professional respect, if not warmth. I agreed to the meeting, but insisted it occur at my attorney's office. When Patricia arrived the next day, she looked exhausted but determined. Melody, I won't waste time with pleasantries, she began. The company is in crisis, and you're at the center not because you did anything wrong, but because you were the only one who consistently did what was right. She slid a folder across the table, eerily similar to the dismissal paperwork David had presented just 11 days earlier. This officially reverses your dismissal, reinstates your employment retroactively, and confirms your full retirement vesting, she explained. It also includes additional compensation recognizing the difficulties you've experienced. I opened the folder. The compensation package included a sum equal to 5 years' salary, lifetime healthcare coverage, and a formal board apology. We're also establishing a new corporate ethics division. Patricia continued. We'd like you to help design it as a consultant after your retirement. Your experience is invaluable. I closed the folder without commenting on the offer. And David Langston, the involved board members. Patricia's expression hardened. Criminal charges are expected. The company will not be defending them. Justice, it seemed, had finally arrived at Grantwell Manufacturing. 6 months later, I sat in a federal courtroom watching David Langston and 2 former board members enter guilty pleas to securities fraud charges. The man who had so casually ended my career now looked diminished in his dark suit, his arrogance replaced by defeat. Our eyes met briefly as he turned to leave, and I saw recognition there not of me specifically, but of what I represented. The consequences of his actions personified. The GRW scandal had become a case study in corporate governance failures and the crucial role of internal compliance. I had declined the consulting position with the reorganized company. choosing instead to work with regulatory agencies developing better whistleblower protocols. My story had inspired other compliance officers to come forward with their own documentation of corporate wrongdoing, creating a ripple effect across industries. The SEC had awarded me a substantial whistleblower payment, 15% of penalties assessed against Grantwell. Combined with my retirement and settlement, I had more financial security than I'd ever imagined possible. I'd established a scholarship fund for women pursuing careers in corporate ethics and compliance, naming it after Thomas. Elizabeth had relocated to St. Paul to be closer to me, bringing my two grandchildren. We spent weekends together at my new lakeside home, building memories I'd missed while working all those long hours. One evening, as we sat watching the sunset over the water, Elizabeth asked a question that caught me off guard. "Mom, do you regret staying at GRW all those years, given how it ended?" I considered this carefully. "No," I finally answered. "I regret that exposing them was necessary, but I don't regret my work there." Integrity isn't just about being honest when it's easy. It's about maintaining your principles especially when it costs you something. Elizabeth nodded thoughtfully. "You taught me that, you know? Not with words, but by example." That, I realized, was perhaps the most meaningful outcome of all. Not the vindication, not the financial security, but the knowledge that my choices had shown my daughter what it meant to stand firm in your values regardless of consequences. As for GRW Manufacturing, the company had survived though greatly diminished. The new leadership had implemented stringent compliance protocols and transparent reporting practices. They still sent me their annual reports, perhaps as a reminder, perhaps as an apology. I read them carefully, noting the improved practices with professional satisfaction. Some might see my story as one of revenge, but I've never viewed it that way. I simply did what I had always done, documented the facts, reported the truth, and stood by my findings. The difference is that this time, finally, others were forced to listen.